touch a little bit on best practices, especially when it comes to coaching. Um, and one of the major issues is anxiety. So how do we deal with anxiety on the court as we're teaching and training? So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a good question. My thoughts are, I'm interested to see what you say. Um, yeah, I don't have any other thoughts yet till maybe you fill me in a bit more what you're thinking and what you learnt.
Okay. Yeah. Because sometimes, in these conversations, it's like a faux conversation. We're talking, but then, I'm more or less lecturing the whole time. So, well, I think the one thing is that there's sort of a sliding scale for how we train players. So when we first get them on the court, we want to create the a very low key, fun, engaging um, situation for them where they pretty much can't fail. We want to make I just saw this quote from Nick Bollettieri, who passed this last week, and you know is paraphrased, he said, I'm not going to allow a player to leave the court having failed. I'll stay late to work with them to make sure that they succeed. Um, and that's kind of impossible to do that all the time with everybody. But I think it's a really good best practice that we want to make people successful. So we have to define sometimes uh, how we do that. How we have
Yeah,
to
one
define
way I do
success
that.
well.
One way I do that to interject and say something is I like to focus on getting that last section of balls or drills in, like the last shot, even the last 5 shots, and just getting it nice and cleanly with a good kind of rhythm and feel. So the player has a good muscle memory finishing the lesson. So when they come back, that's their memory for the lesson, because it's often how you finish the session. But even in a point, you can have a really good rally. And like mentioning Federer getting annoyed, I guess he hit a winner. But the end of, I guess, a good rally, and if you're on the negative end, can make you feel bad. But if you finish off that point in a really good way, you think the opposite, where the rally was
Hmm.
probably equally as good except for the ending.
Yeah, that's a great point. And one thing that I've been reading about lately is the concept of recency, primacy, and recency. So um, the first and the last things will be most remembered. So the way somebody comes into the lesson and the way that you greet them and the way you engage them and get them going in the lesson is important. And then also, yes, that last thing. And so what I will often do, especially if somebody is working on their serve, is I might end the lesson a little prematurely if they hit one really great serve, and then we'll say, okay, stop. We're going to pick up the balls now because I want that to be the last thing that you remember. And we can fill time with something else, but if if they're hitting one of their best serves of the entire session, I want them to capitalize on that. So, and then as players improve and as their training takes them higher and higher, and the atmosphere in which they're going to compete becomes more and more fraught with anxiety, then we need to train them with higher levels of anxiety. So I'll do a lot of things with my juniors where I put them through an incredibly difficult drill, that's much more difficult than any point that they would ever face. And then when they learn to succeed at that, then I'm like, okay, well, now normal tennis, regular tennis is going to seem easy for you. And, another thing I might do is have the juniors play points, and then I may change the score. Um, and, and then, I might announce the score uh, wrongly, and then they'll argue with me, and they'll say, wait a second, and then we'll have like an argument over the score. And so it's practice for them learning how to engage the difficulty of somebody made a mistake on the court with a call or the scoring, and learn to then also regain your composure and keep playing. So something kind of funny happened. I had written visual training for tennis, and I was working on the second edition. And then during that time, I figured out that I needed glasses. And then I got my glasses. And so it was really funny. I realized that I had been disputing calls with some of my players in the last couple of months. And it turns out they were probably right. So, because I wasn't seeing very well. And, that's an important thing to consider, is that we all have different visual experiences. So, but yeah, starting with every practice and every introduction to tennis should be very low anxiety. And then as the practice goes along and as people improve, then we need to subject them to greater levels of difficulty so that they can learn to keep their composure during that time.
It's like when I used to train a lot for swimming, going back to swimming, because I used to swim 8 times a week. They always put a lot of emphasis on warming up, taking your time warming up and cooling down, whether it's a training session or a competition. And I'm just wondering if that kind of relates, the level of intensity where you're just kind of building the muscles up in the warm up, or when you're just trying to get the lactic acid out of your body in the cool down. And that also relates not just physically, but mentally on the challenge difficulties.
Yeah, I think it does. And, often, when I'm practicing with a team, especially, we'll do some very easy things at first, especially hitting in the short court, at the standing on the service lines. And while that's a pretty low key difficulty, then what I challenge them to do is use nearly perfect footwork so that they're having, they have something excellent that they're focusing on, that they're working on hitting the ball as cleanly as they possibly can, which is different than the way a lot of people do a short court exercise. Sometimes they use short court to be lackadaisical. So I think that that's counterproductive. But yes, going smaller and paying closer attention to details, and then going bigger and more challenging with more movement, and can help facilitate continuing